I unironically love Western civilization. Like, I love everything about the West. I love the West. I love liberalism. I'm a liberal. That's like the only political label that I would identify with. I love capitalism. Oh, I love capitalism so much. Jesus Christ. I love having politics. I love having free speech. I love having government that's representative of me, or that's supposed to be. I love the scientific method. I love being able to tell time. I love the fact that I'm able to be in a different time zone right now. I'm in Texas, which is different than New York. It's one time zone over. China doesn't have time zones. You know why China doesn't have time zones? Because they're communist. That's not even me being anti-China. That's literally like, it's supposed to show Beijing's rule. The fact that they go by Beijing time all over the country. And it has like bad effects. It has like actual like it's like psychological warfare, because most of the people, right, that live on the west side of China are not your typical East Asians, right? That's where you get more of like the Muslims, more of like the diverse people, right? Those people are the furthest away from what their time is supposed to be. So they have like the sun setting at like fucking 1 a.m. over there, which is crazy. Imagine you're like going to sleep and it's like bright as fuck outside. Like that fucks with your brain, your circadian rhythm or whatever. Like that's literal psychological warfare. So much so that the Uyghurs, the Uyghur Muslims go by a different time. And that was one of the things that they were getting arrested for and put into fucking concentration camps for, was because they were going by a different time other than Beijing time. Sorry, a little side tangent that has nothing to do with today's topic, like at all. Completely different country that we're talking about today. Syria, specifically as it pertains to Tulsi Gabbard. I teased the Tulsi video. I have one in preparation about Tulsi, okay? There's so much in this administration. Okay, it's a lot. I am not a historian, and this is a historically dense conflict and story of information, because it's in itself, when you hear Tulsi Gabbard meets with Bashar al-Assad, leader of Syria, it doesn't sound that bad. When you don't understand all of the context to the Syrian civil war, when you don't understand all of the context to what Bashar al-Assad was doing to his own population and all of the behind the workings that were going on there. So allow me to fill in some of the blanks. Not all of them. I'm not a historian, okay? Please do your own research. Please fact check me with everything I say. But I'll give you a little rundown.
Senator, as someone who enlisted in the military specifically because of al-Qaeda's terrorist attack on 9/11 and committing myself and my life to doing what I could to defeat these terrorists, it was shocking and a betrayal to me and every person who was killed on 9/11, their families and my brothers and sisters in uniform. When as a member of Congress, I learned about President Obama's dual programs that he had begun really to overthrow the regime of Syria, and being willing to, through the CIA's Timber Sycamore program that has now been made public, of working with and arming and equipping al-Qaeda in an effort to overthrow that regime, starting yet another regime change war in the Middle East. DOD train and equip program, again, begun under President Obama, is widely been known, looked at and studied, that ultimately resulted in over $500 million being used to train who they called moderate rebels, but were actually fighters working with and aligned with al-Qaeda's affiliate on the ground in Syria, all to move forward with their regime change and not acknowledging what was obvious at the time and what has unfortunately borne true, which was that a regime change war in Syria, much like the regime change wars in Iraq, the toppling of Gaddafi and Mubarak, while these are all dictators, would likely result in the rise of Islamist extremists like al-Qaeda taking power. I shed no tears for the fall of the Assad regime, but today we have an Islamist extremist who is now in charge of Syria, as I said, who danced on the streets to celebrate the 9/11 attack, who ruled over Idlib with an Islamist extremist governance, and who has already begun to persecute and kill and arrest religious minorities like Christians in Syria.
I understand.
Why that should be acceptable to anyone is beyond me.
It
is certainly not in our interest.
I appreciate.
Okay, that's enough. We'll rewatch that clip at the end of this video with all of the proper context so we can properly dissect just how much revisionist history she just spouted. In 1971, Hafez al-Assad became elected president of Syria, starting what would soon turn into the Assad regime, to be continued by his son, Bashar al-Assad. In the late 2000s, there was a huge pro-democracy movement going all across the world, overthrowing authoritarian regimes everywhere, namely Tunisia and Egypt. This pro-democracy infectious little bug soon spread to Syria in 2011, where Bashar al-Assad was asked if he thought that it would be a threat to him and his regime. To which he responded that he was confident that Syria would be spared from this because of his resistance to Western democracy. He pointed to the Tunisian leader and to the Egyptian leader, and he pointed to them betraying their people by becoming allies with Western nations, with the United States. And so he assumed that he would be safe because he had not done such a thing. And that could be the only plausible reason that the people were revolting against these authoritarian leaders. As soon as these protests started, Assad, who it's worth noting is a different type of Muslim than the majority of Syrians. So Bashar al-Assad is a Alawite Muslim, whereas the rest of Syria is majority Sunni Muslims. I'll be honest, I don't quite know all of the intricacies between the two, all of the differences, and I'm not going to claim to. If you're interested in that, you can go ahead and Google, it's free. But Bashar al-Assad starts painting all of the protesters against him as these Islamic extremists, and he starts using the military against these extremists because they're so extreme, right? What else are you going to do? So he starts pulling out the tanks, the helicopters, all of the artillery. The goal with all of this was to paint the protesters as members of al-Qaeda. This is from Bashar al-Assad. I'm not talking about anyone in America right now. Bashar al-Assad is using his own military against his protesters, people dissenting his regime, and painting them out to be members very similar to al-Qaeda, Islamic extremists similar to al-Qaeda. So earlier, when I mentioned that Bashar al-Assad thought that he was safe because he didn't cater to the West or whatever, he was asked that in January of 2011. By summer of 2011, tanks were out on the street, military was out on the protest, and the United States and the UN were trying to figure out to what extent they should intervene to this humanitarian crisis going on in Syria. Barack Obama, who I'll be honest, I'm not the biggest fan of his foreign policy, but he did call for Bashar al-Assad to step down, so snaps for that one. Along with a bunch of other European countries, Qatar and Turkey and Saudi Arabia. Those are important because they give military. They start arming the Syrian rebels. They start giving them artillery, start training them, and start helping them to overthrow Bashar al-Assad. This is Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar, okay? Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Qatar. They're helping, they're sending. On the flip side of that, now Bashar al-Assad is receiving weapons from Iran, okay? And Hezbollah is sending their fighters over to help deal with all of the extremist protesters, okay? This is where I feel the need to interject here from this little historical narrative, okay? I understand being anti-war. I understand being a dove. I understand the instinct to go against what in the past has led to a lot of unnecessary death and pain and instability all over the world. So where the US was doing all of these coups and the CIA in South America, you know, all those many years ago, now we want to do the complete opposite, okay? So where we proactively incited a regime change in Afghanistan and ended up in a 20-year-long forever war that got us literally nothing, I understand that the instinct after that is to not engage with any regime changes ever, okay? But then the issue is when you go from one extreme to the other, that's all you're doing. So if you're going from super interventionist to now super isolationist, when the super isolationist fails, now you're just going to go back to being super interventionist. So why don't we just find a middle? Why don't we find a good marker of where to and not to sympathize with terrorists in the name of going against something that the West is doing that's somewhat bad. Okay, we don't have to go to the extreme opposite extreme. But this is very common, and this is, I'm talking to the left, okay? I'm not talking to the right. This is very common in the left. specifically in regards to Israel-Palestine, okay? And to get us back on our historical track, I'll let Ethan Klein take it away.
Now let's move on to everybody's favorite terrorist organization, our friends in the north. It's Hezbollah. Where do I even begin? Thousands of civilians have been killed globally from their terrorist acts, car bombs, and suicide attacks. They even assassinated the Lebanese prime minister. They've hijacked civilian airplanes. They've shot 15,000 rockets into civilian centers. And if you can imagine, that's not even the worst things they've done. They participated in the slaughter of over 500,000 Syrian civilians.
Hey, that's what we're talking about. Well, so quick little recap on our timeline, right? 2010, Tunisia government gets overthrown. Beginning of 2011, Egypt government gets overthrown. Bashar al-Assad in Syria gets asked, do you think that your government is going to get overthrown? He says no, because I don't fuck with the West. Okay, that's all in January of 2011. Hezbollah, Iran, Russia, China, Turkey, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia have all entered the war, either through giving money, through giving artillery, through giving fighters, through giving resources, through giving training, whatever. They're all involved, okay? Then, in October of 2011, okay, same year, now Russia and China enters the race now. Russia and China both start vetoing UN resolutions that would have condemned what Bashar al-Assad was doing. Now, judging from the amount of UN resolutions that we've seen about Israel-Palestine, those are pretty worthless and they don't really do anything. So the fact that they were vetoing them just to condemn it, I don't know, I feel like that's kind of weird. Entering 2011, now you had a lot of different international organizations trying to help bring the civil war to some type of an end, namely the Arab League. The Arab League has an initiative for Syria, basically telling them to stop all of the violence against the protesters, right? And the Syrian government agreed to it at the end of 2011. But entering 2012, the Arab League had just completely abandoned that mission. It just gets a whole lot worse after this. So now the population is getting more and more demotivated, demoralized from all of this ongoing fighting. And in 2013, in Damascus, we see the first instance of when bioweapons was used against Syrian civilians. In late August of 2013, there was a toxic gas attack outside of Damascus, very conveniently located in rebel zones, that killed 1,300 people. Just that one gas attack, 1,300 people. Once bioweapons enter the scene, okay, now the US is freaking out, France freaking out, Britain freaking, everyone's freaking out, because what do you mean this guy's using bioweapons against his own civilians? Obviously he's not saying that. Obviously he's denying all of it, categorically, obviously. But obviously there's something to be suspicious of. While United States, Europe, UN, all of these Western allies start trying to work out an intervention plan or just a proceeding plan on how to go forward with this, Russia, Iran, and China start using the aggression as more fuel to prove that this is exactly what Bashar al-Assad said in the beginning, okay? This is exactly what he said. He said that it was all the West's fault. He said that what happened to Tunisia was because of the West. What happened to Egypt was because of the West. We hate the West. Fuck the West. So now you have Western allies trying to tiptoe and walk on eggshells on what to do, how to intervene. We don't want another Afghanistan. We don't really want to send troops there. How are we going to go forward? And then you have Russia, Iran, China turning that into they're declaring war on us. They're coming against us. They want to completely destroy everyone that's not. They want to spread their Western ideologies and their democracy everywhere, and we don't want that shit. So it's very circular, okay? It's very feeding off of each other. Okay, so after this Arab League plan falls through, the UN goes in there, they try and do a plan, doesn't work. Then the Syrian National Council goes in there, they try and do a plan, also doesn't work. National Coalition for Syrian Revolutionary and Opposition Forces goes in, they try and do something, that also doesn't work. Okay, nothing's working. Now we have America starting to try and maybe do some training programs to some rebels. I don't know, they're still very, very hesitant. So they're not really doing all that much. Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar are like the top 3 funders for the anti-Assad forces, okay? They're giving artillery, they're giving money, they're giving fighters. All the while, Assad is still getting money, weapons, and people from Iran, Russia, and Hezbollah. Okay, so prior to this, all of Bashar al-Assad's talking, he's just saying al-Qaeda, but we don't really have like a solid person of al-Qaeda, okay? In 2013, we have the Nusra Front. The Nusra Front is an al-Qaeda affiliate operating group in Syria, and it's considered like one of the best fighting forces. They're like top leaders in the anti-Assad regime, but they don't last very long before another al-Qaeda group goes in, beats them, and starts the ISIL, the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, otherwise known as ISIS, the Islamic State in Iraq, in Syria. So now that Bashar al-Assad has ISIS, he's claiming that everything that he's doing is in order to just stop ISIS, right? Like it's all, the only people that we're attacking is ISIS. The only people that we're killing is ISIS. It's only going after ISIS. There's also so much more going on in the background that I'm not talking about because it's not as relevant to the story. And this is where we enter Tulsi, okay? While the Western allies are trying to get their hands on bioweapons that Syria keeps on claiming don't exist, do you want to know what Tulsi's doing? In 2013, okay, Tulsi is a freshman in Congress, and she is voting no against Obama's propositions to use force against Bashar al-Assad for his use of chemical bioweapons. Now, granted, in the context of the time, this was not popular, and she was not the only one that voted against it. But I will fault her for being the main one and the only one to go ahead and visit Bashar al-Assad after the fact. She visited him. She went on a trip to go see him. We're not even there yet. But Tulsi basically like introduced herself to Congress by speaking out against Obama on this and being super against him and super anti-war. Going back to Syria now, Western allies have secured a agreement to get back all of the chemical bioweapons that don't exist by the end of June of 2014. So all of the chemical weapons that didn't exist are now going on international control. The chemical weapons that didn't exist before. Syria is now giving them up to international control. But they didn't exist before. Great. At this point, Russia also starts airstriking, starts like authorizing military operations is what they call them, but airstriking in Syria. In 2016, ISIS starts infighting and getting pushed out of the territory. By 2018, the only city that was being ruled by rebels and still fought in was Idlib. This was Syria and Russia going against the rebels and Turkey. Russia-Ukraine war is also weakening all of the resources that are going to Syria. Iran is also being weakened by the Israel-Hamas war. So both of these being weakened in combination with the protesters, rebels rising, Bashar al-Assad ends up fleeing to Russia, and that's pretty much up to now. I'm sure you caught it in my language. I'm sure that you conveyed the message, but just to really drill it down, Bashar al-Assad was using ISIS as a scapegoat. He wanted ISIS to be violent. He wanted to have an excuse to use the military against his people. He wanted to have an excuse to incite violence in his country and to use these chemical bioweapons. He wanted an excuse so that he could stay in power, because that's what authoritarian dictators do. So going back to the very beginning, right? Back in 2011, at the very start of all of the protests, Bashar al-Assad is arresting all of the protesters, right? But the ones that he's releasing from prison, the ones that he's letting go, are all of the extremists. He's keeping all of the moderates and all of the peaceful protesters in jail to let all of the extremists out. Why? So that they can keep on doing violence, so that they can keep on spreading, so he keeps on having an excuse. In a very similar fashion, for some reason, the Syrian government never went after ISIS for all of their talk about going after ISIS. Oh, we're only attacking ISIS. We're only using the tanks on ISIS. they never did anything really substantially. It was just a bunch of little attacks on all of the other small outside, peripheral rebel groups. But the main one was ISIS. And he just wasn't addressing that. He just wasn't going after them. Not only is the Syrian government, for an authoritarian government that's supposed to be super against ISIS and has like tanks all over, not only are they just like giving over like really important cities like Aleppo and Raqqa. I'm so sorry if I'm butchering those names. Not only is the Syrian government like letting ISIS take control of territories that are important to the government, right? But even going so far as to help them. Like in 2015, the US embassy in Syria said, reports indicate the regime is making airstrikes in support of #ISIL's advance on Aleppo, the city, aiding extremists against Syrian population. What? Like, what do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean the dictator that's using bioweapons against his own civilians is also aiding the extremists that he's supposed to be attacking? He's also buying oil from them. Like, the US State Department has stated unequivocally, the Syrian regime has purchased oil from ISIS through various intermediaries, adding to the terrorist group's revenue. So they're like funding, they're funding, oh my God, it's Netanyahu part. This is the Netanyahu playbook. Why is this a thing? Why do warmongers, well, no, I just answered my own question because they're more warmongers. The easiest way to get a war is to provoke the other side. How do you provoke the other side? You give them a reason to hate you and you give them the means to hate you with. Reason to hate you, you're attacking them and you're giving money to hate you with. According to the US Treasury Department in 2014, ISIL may have earned as much as several $1 million per week, or 100 million in total, from the sale of oil and oil products to local smugglers, who in turn sold them to regional actors, notably the Assad regime. And it wasn't just Assad, okay? It's crazy. It was a symbiotic relationship. It wasn't just Assad helping ISIS via oil and supportive airstrikes, okay? ISIS literally pulled out of territory that they had conquered from Syria to help Syria, because ISIS, okay, in July of 2014, I think this is before the airstrike, okay? So I guess ISIS was helping them first. Maybe Syria was like passing on the favor. I don't know. Maybe they were going back and forth. I know the oil started in 2014 though, so this was after oil, before the airstrike help from Syria, okay? ISIS is in Aleppo. They took control of Aleppo, and Syrian government officials, Syrian forces, regime forces, whatever, are running away from a different extremist group, the FSA, the Free Syrian Alliance, and they need to get into Aleppo. So what does ISIS do? They flee Aleppo. They get out. They get out of the city and they just give it to the regime again. The city that they took from the regime that they're supposed to be against. They just gave it back to the regime. And the regime was able to just get rid of the FSA. Like, is that not? That's crazy. It's crazy. And not only was Assad literally buying oil from ISIS, okay, but he was also monitoring or overseeing the shipments of weapons that they were getting. It's actually crazy. So there's this guy, his name is Khatijri, and not only is he the CEO of like Khatijri Oils, which is an oil company, right? Which, remember, Syria's buying oil, okay? But he is also a trucking company. The trucking company that ships in the weapons to ISIS. In 2016, it was identified that Khatijri, this company, okay, was the only trucking company accessing some of the ISIS-controlled areas. So one must ask, why is a man who is working with the Syrian regime, I'm so confused on why the government of Syria would have so many contracts with a company that was exclusively shipping to ISIS areas. It was shipping weapons to ISIS area. I don't know why. I'm just wondering why a Syrian regime that was like super against al-Qaeda and like super against ISIS, why they would fund that. Why would they send those trucks there? Like what? Just to make sure that we're all on the same page, okay? Bashar al-Assad used bioweapons that he said didn't exist that ended up getting confiscated by international authorities on his civilians. Bashar al-Assad is buying oil from ISIS and funding ISIS. Bashar al-Assad is shipping weapons to ISIS and exclusively in ISIS areas. Bashar al-Assad is purposely letting violent criminals out of jail with the hopes and intentions that they will go on to commit more crimes. Bashar al-Assad is supporting airstrikes that support ISIS's taking over of their cities. And yet, for some reason, Tulsi Gabbard is posting on fucking Twitter. Bad enough, US has not been bombing al-Qaeda/al-Nusra in Syria. But it's mind-boggling that we protest Russia's bombing of these territories. Well, now I'm just confused. I thought that we were anti-war. I'm so confused. I thought that you were against Obama using military force for the exact reason that we don't want to be in a forever war, that we're anti-war, that we don't want to be interventionist. So why are you supporting Russia's, oh my God, whatever. Al-Qaeda attacked us on 9/11 and must be defeated. Obama won't bomb them in Syria. Putin did. Listen, I could make a whole nother hour-long video on her Russia propaganda as well. Today was only about Syria, even though they are very intertwined. And now that I've properly laid down all of the groundwork for what was going on in Syria at this time, let's look at what Tulsi Gabbard did. She met with him, and she was paid by members of Hezbollah. Oh, Jesus Christ. She met with him. She just took a 4-day trip to Syria. Just didn't tell anyone, didn't get clearance. She's a representative of Congress. She just didn't get any type of like clearance forms. There was no alert. There was no notice. She just secretly ended up in Syria. And when she was asked about it, she did the thing. She did the anti-war thing. There's so much suffering and we just need to put a stop to it. It's just both sides. They just need to chill out and we just need to stop. And the US doesn't even know anything about anything going on. I'm sure all of the Syrians would love to be under Bashar al-Assad's rule. And I don't even think that he did any of the chemical weapons. So that was Tulsi, by the way. Being that this was a secret trip, right? Like no one knew that she was there. She didn't get clearance. She wasn't like told to go there. She wasn't being funded by taxpayer dollars, right? Like, right? No, she wasn't. Don't worry. She didn't use taxpayer dollars to go on a trip to Syria. That would be fucking crazy. She used Hezbollah's money to go on a trip to Syria. Duh. When Tulsi came back and announced, or rather wrote an entire fucking diatribe about how sad and how heartbreaking it was to see all of these Syrians so mad at the US over what we were doing in Syria. Obviously, the American people's first reaction was, "You better not have fucking spent my money, you bitch." To which Tulsi responds, "I'll pay it back, I promise." Not to us though, don't worry. She didn't use taxpayer monies. She went courtesy of a group called Access Ohio, otherwise known as the Arab American Community Center for Economics and Social Services. So Bassam Quram, the person who funded this trip for Tulsi, or who helped fund this trip for Tulsi, it wasn't him, it was an organization that he's on board for, but whatever, did an exclusive interview in The Atlantic where he said, quote, "Congresswoman Gabbard had a position on what's taking place in Syria and about regime change and these sort of things. So we thought that would be most likely very helpful for her to see things on the ground, similar to what we did with Congressman Kuchinik." And Tulsi even gets asked about this in her confirmation hearing.
You traveled to Syria and Lebanon in January 2017. Bassam Quam personally paid for that trip, and Bassam and his brother Ilyas accompanied you to both Lebanon and Syria. The Quam brothers have links to the Syrian Social Nationalist Party, an ally of Hezbollah. And in fact, in 2008, the Syrian Social Nationalist Party participated in the assassination of a former Lebanese prime minister and assisted Hezbollah in Beirut. When did you become aware of the links between the Qawam brothers and the Syrian Social Nationalist Party?
Senator, thank you for your question. Just a point of clarification. I paid for my own expenses and travel on that trip. I was not aware of any accusations of these two Lebanese Americans associations until after the trip occurred.
And that's when you reimbursed?
Correct. Correct. Not because of, I wanted to make sure that there were no perceived conflicts of interest. I addressed this specific question to these Lebanese Americans who had organized the trip, and they vehemently denied any associations with that group.
I don't know why she's making it seem like out of the goodness of her heart. Oh, after taking this secret shady trip to Syria that no one knew about, that no one approved, and everyone was very scared about, in order to alleviate any of the thoughts of a conflict of interest, I proactively decided to pay my own plane for this trip. You know, just out of the goodness of my own heart, because this was a fact-finding mission, as she says. Except that's not what happened, except that's literally not what happened, that's not what happened, and that's not what happened. And she got back from Syria and everyone was like, why the fuck did you use taxpayer dollars to go to Syria? And then her response was, I didn't use taxpayer dollars, I got sent there by an organization. To which everyone said, why the fuck did you get sent there by a lesbian. A Lebanese organization. No, fuck that. Lesbian organization. Lesbian. Sounds like a slur. Her office even sent out a release calling it, quote, a distraction. So it doesn't sound like a proactive, like, oh, I just wanted to alleviate a conflict of interest. It sounds like you guys are annoying the fuck out of me. And if you want me to just pay for my trip, I guess I'll just fucking pay for the trip. All of this is just so crazy to me, because if you read her article that she wrote after this trip, okay? First of all, just something that I thought was really funny, okay? In the beginning, she says, like, I traveled all throughout Syria, from Damascus to Aleppo. I just, like, why are those the two cities that you chose? Because both of those are controlled by Assad, like, at the time that she went, right? So why did she only went to parts that were controlled by Assad? And if you look at a Syrian map, you have to walk past Idlib, which was the rebel hub, which was like the capital of the rebels. You would have to go past Idlib to go from Aleppo to Damascus, or from Damascus to Aleppo. Like you're going further. You could have just made like a little shoot. You could have, but you didn't. Oh, but you were on a fact-finding mission, you say. Tulsi claims that the Syrian people had only one message to Americans, and that was, there is no difference between moderate rebels and al-Qaeda or ISIS. They're all the same. Except for the fact that there is a difference. And the difference is that al-Qaeda was let out of the Syrian jails, while the moderate rebels were not let out of the Syrian jails. The difference is that al-Qaeda was being funded. The moderate rebels were not being funded by the Syrian regime. The difference is that al-Qaeda was being supported via airstrikes. Like, what? Oh God. Oh gosh. She uses like blatant emotional manipulation by just like randomly bringing up a story of like a little girl getting raped, which is like, okay, if you want to pull that card. She wrote this right when she got back. Okay, this was her like announcing to people that she had gone to Syria. This was like her justification, because everyone was like, what the fuck is going on? And she writes, originally, I had no intention of meeting with Assad, but when given the opportunity, I felt it was important to take it. I think we should be ready to meet with anyone if there's a chance it can help bring about an end to the war, which is causing the Syrian people so much suffering. But that statement just entirely contradicts what Qawam had said in the interview with The Atlantic, right? Like he said the reason why they were talking to Tulsi, the reason why they picked Tulsi was because of her positions in Syria. So if the reason why you picked Tulsi was because of her positions in Syria, did you not tell Tulsi that she was going to be going to Syria? Like, was the message not relayed? Like, did she just miss that part? Or was she maybe fully well aware that she was going to Syria, wanted to go to Syria, and lied about it when she got back because she knew that it was going to piss people off? So all that I've just laid out for you, like, you can't tell me I don't believe you. I don't believe you if you tell me that you think that this woman is the most qualified person to be the director of national intelligence, to be giving the daily intelligence briefings to the president. Okay? And if you want to use the excuse of, oh, well, that was in 2017. That was 8 years ago. Get over it. What are you doing? Your Honor, I would like to present the following into evidence.
Just in complete hindsight, would you view this trip as good judgment?
Yes, Senator. And I believe that leaders, whether you be in Congress or the President of the United States, can benefit greatly by going and engaging, boots on the ground, learning and listening and meeting directly with people, whether they be adversaries or friends.
Right. So not only does she not regret it, but she's also applauding herself for meeting with people on both sides when she only met with people on the pro-Assad side, or she only went to areas that were ruled by Assad. Okay, I don't know exactly who she met with, but those are the areas she said she went to. Contingent on the fact that you fact-checked me and that you believe me and that you think that what I'm saying is genuinely accurate, okay? Because I'm just, like, you went and you go and you fact-checked the video and then you came back and you were like, wow, Arya, like, you're so lovely and perfect. I just needed to finish the video. Hopefully that's exactly what you all did and that's how you got here. If not, trust bro. Knowing all that you know, let's rewatch that video from the beginning. Let's rewatch that clip from the beginning and just take note of all of the revisionist history that is going on here.
Senator, as someone who enlisted in the military specifically because of al-Qaeda's terrorist attack on 9/11,
Cap.
and committing myself and my life to doing what I could to defeat these terrorists,
Cap.
it was shocking and a betrayal to me and every person who was killed on 9/11, their families and my brothers and sisters in uniform. When as a member of Congress, I learned about President.
Are you even from New York? You're not even from New York. Get the fuck out of here. Why are you mentioning 9/11? You're not even from New York. You're from Hawaii. Go back to Hawaii. Talk about Pearl Harbor.
President Obama's dual programs that he had begun really to overthrow the regime of Syria, and being willing to, through the CIA's Timber Sycamore program that has now been made public, of working with and arming and equipping al-Qaeda in an effort to overthrow that regime, starting yet another regime change war in the Middle East.
So tiring. There was no regime change war started. That program was like the most ineffective thing. I wish that it was more effective. Jesus, didn't do anything because no one wanted to do anything. Obama couldn't get funding passed through Congress because of people like fucking you. Okay, so he had to go and covertly authorize the CIA to shadily give weapons to Turkey and Jordan and Saudi Arabia and set up training programs there and trusting in them. But criticizing the way that Obama had to go about this when she's literally the reason why. Like, the reason why we couldn't have more established of a training program, why it couldn't have been more organized and more effective. I'm not saying to give it more money. Okay, that's not what I'm saying at all, because it was definitely a waste of money. But if it was more well thought out, if we weren't trusting Jordan, and which, by the way, it wasn't like a solo program. Saudi Arabia was matching all of the donations that we were putting into it. So it wasn't just like the US is paying everyone's bills. Saudi Arabia was paying equally as many bills. Maybe, just maybe, if the CIA didn't have to use like Saudi Arabia as a middleman to get funding and to get weapons and to get training on the ground in Syria, if we could have just like gone over and done it ourselves and done the vetting ourselves, I don't know, maybe not as many weapons would have ended up in the hands of jihadists. Maybe Russia and Iran wouldn't have been able to interfere with the training and with the weapon shipments as much as they did. So who knows? I can't say with 100% certainty that it would have been perfect and Bashar al-Assad would have been perfectly and peacefully overthrown had Tulsi voted yes in the House. But I will say you have no right to comment on the way that he had to go and solve the issue when you made it so impossibly difficult for him to solve the issue.
Begun under effort to overthrow that regime, starting yet another regime change war in the Middle East. DoD train and equip program, again, begun under President Obama, is widely been known, looked at, and studied, that ultimately resulted in over $500 million being used to train who they called moderate rebels, but were actually fighters working with and aligned with al-Qaeda's affiliate on the ground.
So just remember, her definitions are quite literally backwards. Like, quite literally, Syria was classifying all of the extremists as moderates and all of the moderates as extremists. So when she's saying, you know, they were supporting all of the extremists and they weren't looking at the moderates, she's talking about us supporting the moderates and not looking and not talking about not looking at the extremists
in Syria, all to move forward with their regime change and not acknowledging what was obvious at the time and what has unfortunately borne true, which was that a regime change war in Syria, much like the regime change wars in Iraq, the toppling of Gaddafi and Mubarak, while these are all dictators, would likely result in the rise of Islamist extremists like al-Qaeda taking power.
I'm glad that you acknowledge that he's a dictator. I'm glad that you acknowledge that these are terrorist groups. I'm confused on why you're not acknowledging that the dictator is funding the terrorist groups.
I shed no tears for the fall of the Assad regime, but today we have an Islamist extremist who is now in charge of Syria, as I said, who danced on the streets to celebrate the 9/11 attack, who ruled over Idlib with an Islamist extremist governance, and who has already begun to persecute and kill and arrest religious minorities like Christians in Syria.
How many bonus points did she get for saying Christians? How many bonus points did she get for saying they were persecuting Christians?
Why that should be acceptable to anyone is beyond me.
It shouldn't
is
be.
certainly
And
not in our...
Extra bonus points for going hard on that one. Listen, I don't think that anyone should be getting persecuted. And so if there are Christians getting persecuted in Syria right now, why don't we save them? Bring them over. We have an asylum process for exactly this reason, for people that are facing indiscriminate persecution based off of something that they can't control, that they can't change, like their religion. Or do you not actually care? Or are you just saying that just to incite some emotions? Tulsi Gabbard is genuinely my biggest fear for the future of this country. Not because of her, but because of Donald Trump. If she is the one giving him his daily briefings for intelligence, she's controlling basically what he thinks like the top national security threats are. And if she is someone who is incapable of seeing facts about authoritarian regimes, about shady dealings, about corruption, about all of these things, if she is so blind as to not realize that the Lebanese man, she was so blind as to not think that the two Lebanese men that just want to pay for her to go to Syria randomly might have ulterior motives. Like, I don't know if I want that person. Well, I know for a fact I don't want that person anywhere near national security secrets. And it's not even just about her and Donald Trump. Now I'm going a step further. Imagine being like whatever the European equivalent to DNI is for like Germany, France, Italy, whatever. Like, can you imagine being in that position and seeing this person in like your American counterpart? Would you tell that American counterpart any of your information, any of your relevant information? If you had information that could be a threat to Western civilization as we know it, would you tell the person who seems to be on the side of an authoritarian dictator who's against Western civilization as we know it? Something to think about. I don't know. This video took me so long to research because I genuinely knew nothing about Syrian civil war, and I still don't. I still know nothing. I only know exactly what I told you. I will leave a link to my Miro board down below that I used for this video. It's a fat one. Okay, there was a lot of research that went into this. Fact check all of it. As always, make your own opinions. Don't believe me. If you've made it this far, you probably like what I have to say, so I'm probably going to say that you'll like what I have to say in the future. So I'm going to suggest that you go ahead and subscribe down below and click that little bell so you get notified the next time that I post. Hopefully, it'll be a much shorter video. But who knows? We have so much more time. 4 more years.